Mr. Minnick helping my students write for loops as opposed to tracing them, which it is expected that you've done all the tracing for loops and while loops worksheets in this unit before you tackle this particular worksheet. Now I'll point out one other thing. On some of the while loop worksheets that you traced, the algorithm and code segments found on those while loop worksheets could be useful here on this worksheet converted to a for loop, because in general a while loop can be converted to a for loop with a little bit of knowledge. Okay, let's look at the directions. Complete the following exercises. Trace the loops where columns are provided, circling your final values over here on the right side. Okay, number one, rearrange and rewrite the following statements. So a for loop iterates 5 times and counts that number of iterations, storing the total in the variable sum. Cross out any unused statements and recopy the lines of code that you need in this middle area neatly. Okay, let's begin here. Well, first of all, you should just cross out the line of code right here, sum plus 1 equals sum, because that's illegal. You can't have an arithmetic expression on the left of an equal symbol in a computer science programming language assignment statement. So anytime you have an equal symbol, you can't have an expression on the left. In algebra, you might be allowed to have such a thing, but not in computer science. Now, the line of code at the top, sum equals sum plus 1, is useful, and I think it ends up being used in this exercise, but not the one that I just crossed out. Okay, so we need a for loop, but we have to decide which of these 3 that I offer to you are to be used. I want the for loop to iterate exactly 5 times. And because of the way the range function works when it has 2 parameters, well, I don't want to give you too much help, but only one of those will be used. So I'm going to, in the middle here, because I might need code above it, and I probably will need code below it, I'm going to write out for I in range. And I'm not going to fill in that second number because I want you to look it up in the lecture notes, or maybe try it in Python, or just look over old worksheets, but I'm going to put a gap there. You can fill in whatever number goes there. So 2 of these 4 statements will need to be crossed out, and 1 will not be crossed out. Okay, our job is to count the number of loop iterations. And if you count, that means you need a counter statement, which means you're adding 1 each time, because that's what a counter statement does. It adds 1. I don't want a plus equals I, crossing that extraneous statement out. I want this plus 1 line of code here, sum equals sum plus 1. Now I know I can shorten that to sum plus equals 1, but that wasn't given to you as a line of code. So let's indent, for good style, that first line over there on the left, sum equals sum plus 1. That is the counter statement that would add 1 each time the loop iterates, which is exactly what I'm asked to do in this exercise. So maybe you want to put a little check mark next to that to show that you've used it. That's up to you, but don't cross it out. Okay, it's always good to initialize variables to 0, and in this case you do want to initialize the variable sum to 0, and you would do that at the beginning. So sum equals 0. I'm in the habit of always putting a blank line above for loops, so that's why I kept a gap there. You don't have to on this worksheet though. But that line of code starts sum at 0, and that's pretty much it. You don't want the I plus equals sum line of code. That just never showed up on any previous worksheet. That's extraneous. And now it's up to you to pick which of those 4 statements you need to use here to fill in the blank. Now let's begin to trace this on the right just to see what happens. Sum starts at 0 and I starts at 1. We go through the loop, sum equals sum plus 1. Sum plus 1 would add up to 2. In this case, 0 plus 1 is 1. So a 1 plugs in for sum. The loop cycles back up to the top. I steps up to 2 because that's what I does in this kind of a situation. And now sum is whatever Oh, I misspoke earlier in the video here. I said it's sum plus I, but really it was sum plus 1. Okay, again, I'm going to do sum plus 1. Well, 1 plus 1 is 2, and that 2 plugs back in the sum, so we have a 2 here. I goes up to 3, and then I'll just take you one more time through the loop, sum plus 1 again, and I'm going to stop there, and you need to continue this pattern and circle your final answer there for sum, and of course finish this out to wherever I ends up being. Okay, exercise 2. It's similar, but instead of counting the number of iterations, I want you to accumulate the total of the numbers 1 through and including 5. Well, you could pretty much check that answer by just adding up 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 on your own. But your code should do that, and the final answer of sum the final value stored in sum should be whatever that grand total is. Well, in this case, we're doing accumulation. So you're going to be using this line of code sum plus equals I. That will be useful somewhere here in the middle. And be sure that you get your indentation right, because Python requires proper indentation in the body of a for loop. Okay, you can cross out that extraneous line of code that just never works in Python to start with. And good luck on this one. I'm not going to do the rest of this exercise, but you'll need to write 2 or 3 or 4 more lines of code here and trace it. And we have done these on previous worksheets where we added up the running total of whatever integers the variable I takes on as it iterates through a loop. It's sum plus equals I here. This is supposed to be an I. It was a little messy there with my printing. Okay, number 3. I'm not going to do it for you. You have to write everything from scratch. You'll probably need to initialize the variable sum to 0 here at the beginning. That would just be safe in this case. Your final answer here for sum should end up being 46. You should have 46 circled, and you should be writing code here that adds up 10 plus 11 plus 12 plus 13. And it uses a for loop to do that. Good luck with that 2 or 3 or 4 lines of code. Number 4, finishing up almost this worksheet. Here, I want you to do the same thing you did in number 3. I want you to accumulate a bunch of integers, storing them in the variable sum again. But this time, not the numbers like, say, 10 through 13. In this case, it's the numbers 2 through 6, but only the even numbers, 2 through 6. Little hint. In this exercise, you're probably going to be using the range function like you are in all these exercises on this worksheet. In your for statement, you're going to use range, but you're going to need 3 numbers in the parentheses to be efficient instead of just 2 numbers. You'll need the starting point, the ending point plus 1, because of the way range works, and then the step amount. And if you make the step amount 2, then you're hitting every even number on the number line if you start at 2. So start I at 2, and then make it step by 2, and it will hit the numbers 2, 4, 6. And then you'll need to add them together in a running total, accumulating them into the variable sum, and you'll need to trace this code segment here on the right edge of the paper. So it's going to be for I in range something, comma, something, comma, something. And number 5, oh, by the way, number 4, if you end up using an if statement that is inefficient, you don't need the if statement. Number 5, here you're just displaying your last name using the print function. There are no variables other than I being used, and I just want your last name printed exactly 13 times using a for loop. And number 6, similar to number 4, you're probably stepping by 2, but you're displaying the odd numbers between and including 11 and 33. And you're printing those. You're not adding them up. You're not accumulating the running total. You're just printing the numbers themselves using a for loop.